Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of the Tunic Counter Gamers. Today, we're diving into meta shifts, deck archetypes, and the Living Legend format, and all that it encompasses. Whether you're a veteran missing Starvo, or a new player wondering what all the hype is about, this episode is for you. From meta to legend, and the shift pile it leaves behind. Welcome to episode 7. All right.
Pretty good one.
Thank you. My name's Will.
I'm Ning.
I'm Trevor.
All right. And in the comment corner, what do we have, Ning?
So, from Mr. Cakes, this one is back in our episode 5 where it takes 2 to tempo. So his comment was saying, actually missed the Beast Within to Arsenal play last night, where we were talking about thinking ahead of responding to a Codex of Frailty and perhaps planning ahead if your opponent either picks up CNC or Leave No Witnesses. And then on top of that, he mentioned you guys should pick up a matchup, define what you want to do in that matchup for each hero, and determine what your goal is for early game, mid game, and late game, and what you would consider to be successful at each stage. Then determine your proximity to that goal as success at each stage. I think this is a huge thing that we either lightly touched on or didn't really dive into at all, where I think our general thought was, hey, have a game plan and then go for it. But I think what Mr. Cake says over here, he is saying, you know, your early game plan and your late game plan could be very different things. So you just have to identify where you are and then figure out when it's time to shift your game plan. And I think that's pretty important thing to note, right? Because especially for a mid-range character, sometimes you're blocking, sometimes you're attacking, but once you get towards the end, it might get to a point where it makes a lot more sense just to get a lot more aggressive. So because, you know, everybody is lower health, and then now they have to start respecting your damage no matter how small or big it is. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
And then a small correction, actually, because I actually did this on a matchup against an assassin. So we were talking about the Leave No Witness. And Beast Within actually only triggers when it's pinned to the discard pile. So this wouldn't work with Beast Within. Because when this hits a hero bench, top card of the deck and up to 1 card in the arsenal. So it's banished, not discarded.
That is correct. And so I think that's our previous commenter before. He mentioned that when a CNC is coming into play,
yes,
then you would put in the Beast Within. But if it's a Leave No Witness, then play something else. Or actually, honestly, Beast Within, if you're okay getting hit, is probably a good target too. Because then there's the assassin doesn't get extra value out of that. But yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then, as continuing on with our tradition, guys, what did we learn since last week?
I've learned that I just need to play more Flesh and Blood. I haven't played in 2 weeks just because of work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, that's my lesson.
Yeah, I kind of learned that. Well, last time I played was actually like 2 weeks ago at the Pro Quest, where I got to top 8, but kind of relearned the lesson. I just kind of need to take my time because I made a pretty egregious misplay that really cost me the game there, and was working with good information, but still just like forgot that he could. It was against an Aurora. I forgot he could activate the Orange Piece, make a rune chant, and come at me with arcane damage. So I pitched a red because I didn't think there was any more arcane damage coming. And then if I had just pitched a blue, we would have been fine. But I took a second, maybe looked at the board.
That's rough.
Made the right play. That one, it kind of hurt. It kind of hurt pretty bad. But we're here. Won't make that mistake again.
I will say I am incredibly happy with the way the podcast is shaping up because I, for the first time in the year I've been playing, actually went 3-0 at our armory.
Hey.
With Fang. And I got it.
Hey, man. Congrats.
Appreciate it. Right. So this podcast is now officially over, y'all. I'm just joking. But it was kind of like I was running Fang as a really aggressive deck, and really, like I was saying to you guys, maybe I should play him a little bit more slowly. And that way I could actually, use him a little bit mid, take more value in my turns. Because I was just swinging with no intent or plan. Like, it was just get the Philippines online, swing, swing, swing. But sometimes you really have to think a little bit ahead for more value in the future turns. And I'm not talking about the second Draconic Chain Link where you play that attack reaction, it gets a +3 instead of +2. But it's more like, is it better to swing with the first dagger and arsenal that last card to really set up for the next turn? And so I really
Mhm.
got ahead, and it was interesting. So I am glad that we talked about value, and it really helped out in that game too. So and then even at the last armory, I got 2-1, and that was with KO, right? Which is a pretty good record because I haven't played KO in over 5 months. So it was good to go back to the old familiar thing, and I still took it the same concept and really try to play the value game, looking at every intent on the cards I played, and I did pretty good. So I had Andrew on the ropes, and he's a very good player. Not Andrew Cook, Andrew Lawrence, I think. But he
Mhm.
was able to crack his boots. He was playing Verdance, crack his boots and kill me on my turn, which I will
Mm.
eventually learn. The Verdance does that very well. But all right, so now talking about Meta 2 Legends and the shift pile it leaves behind. Trevor, do you want to give us a little recap of why we're talking about this?
Yeah, so when we're recording this, we're in the middle of the ProQuest season, which is where there's, I believe, 1,500 points that can get allocated to these heroes. So anytime a hero wins, they get a little share of those points. And right now, we think it's about like 2 to 3 ish that these heroes are getting. And in week 1, Enigma and Zen, both from Part the Misveil, got enough living legend points to go past the 1,000 point threshold.
Mm,
So they're no longer legal in Classic Constructed, which is a pretty big meta shift. Then in the second week, Aurora got without Enigma and Zen, and she got the vast majority of the points. And it's looking like she could even LL before the season's over in the next 2 weeks.
hmm
So there's going to be Enigma and Aurora, which were arguably the two best decks in the format, are no longer going to be legal in Classic Constructed. So it's going to be a pretty big shakeup for a lot of players.
And for those new to the game of Flesh and Blood, since we are a Learning and Journey podcast, I will always throw that in there. What is Living Legend?
Living, Ning, you got it.
Sure. So I guess for to bring in some comparison with Magic, and I guess Magic is the easiest one for me to compare it to, right? They come out with a lot of sets, and at some point you have to figure out, okay, what cards are you going to stop playing with? What cards are you going to try making it relevant to your meta? And so for Magic, I believe right now, to compete in Standard at a tournament, you would play with cards from the recent sets within the past 3 years. So anything outside of 3 years is no longer considered legal for Standard. For Flesh and Blood, we don't have that issue. We can play with cards as old as the game first started. Instead, because this is a hero-centric game, whenever a hero obtains 1,000 or above or more points of these living legend points, they will suddenly be not legal to play in Classic Constructed. Or similarly with Blitz, if they earn enough points, I think they've also bumped that up to 1,000. They will no longer be legal to play in Blitz either. However, like Will mentioned at the very beginning, just because they have LL'd, if you will, out of Classic Constructed doesn't mean you can no longer play with them. They are now just only playable in the Living Legend format, where you can play any hero with most cards, just outside of the ones that have been banned, right? Another key point is whenever a hero becomes LL'd out, so no longer legal in the Classic Constructed format, the signature weapon of that hero as well is also no longer legal. So, for example, if Azalea ever gets Living Legend, it feels like it may be sooner than you think. What's her weapon again? It's called Death
Dealer.
Death Dealer.
Oh,
It's such a good weapon, right? And there's a lot of speculation that the new Ranger that's coming out, Marlin, is going to really be able to abuse that weapon. However, if Azalea LLs within the next, upcoming seasons or two, then suddenly Marlon can no longer use that weapon, which is also very interesting. I don't know how I feel about it, to be fair, but overall, I think it's an interesting concept of either meta shift or deck meta shift, if you will.
And I know personally, we were scared that KO, the brute, Mandible Claw, because that weapon is associated with him, but every other brute from Leviathan and Rhinar uses that weapon. They don't have another great option for such good value. So we were afraid that if he would LL fast, you take that weapon with him. So it's the hero, once they accumulate 1,000 points, plus the weapon, will go into the Living Legend status, where they fight other legends. Right? And part of this, and this
except Zen. Zen was the one who was not in Living Legend status, but could still compete with them in the Living Legend format for a while. I don't know how good he was per se, but I do know he made top 8 a decent amount of times in Living Legend tournaments, which is very funny to me.
Yeah, I think there was a time where Zen was the best deck in Blitz, the best deck in CC, and the best deck in LL, and you were just kind of doing the same thing in all three.
Until they banned all the things, right?
Yeah.
But I do like how it sounds like when these heroes are in our constructed or the current format, the standard format, classic constructed, they kind of keep each other in check, right? And so when these decks, Trevor, I think you mentioned it, when they're overly aggressive decks, when they're shifting out, then you see the rise of slower decks come more prominent in the meta, right? And so we're going to talk about a little bit about the meta shift, and we're also going to talk about deck archetypes. So, Ning, I know you were blinging out your Aurora. I know you have a special place in your heart for your Aurora.
Well, and then it feels really bad to hear that she's about to just for multiple reasons. One is the blingingness, but the second one is in the recent, we'll say month, I have slowly accrued the necessary equipment and cards to really be able to compete enough. Like, I just got Shock Charmers, and that's mostly an Aurora card, right? And I'm like, okay, I have these cards, so now whenever I finally get the time and work is not holding me back, I can finally compete and do more official things. But it sounds like by the time that I'm able to do a real tournament, she'll be gone. And so now I have to figure out a new game plan, but B, man, it feels bad that a hero that came out last September is already non-playable soon.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't think, Aurora's not long for the classic constructive format, right? So I call this the decline of it's over 9,000 aggro, right? Because there's an overly aggressive aggro that just recently came out and became dominant at the beginning of the year. And you really saw that with Aurora, Zen, and there's, other decks like that. But there's a normal aggro meta that's kind of typical, and that was like your KO, even your Dash IO, right? Wouldn't you consider that an aggro?
Yeah, Dash IO for sure. KO, he could block a little bit, I thought, right? But at Dash IO, you're just trying to keep your full hand and send back.
Yeah.
So she's definitely aggro.
So with this meta that's kind of slowing down, like a little bit of the gas got pushed and the car's slowing down, what's that mean for the whole meta now? Like, as these overly aggressive decks kind of are going out, because even Enigma is a high value deck, but with Zen, Aurora exiting, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't even really call like the decks that left very aggressive right now, really. Like, Enigma was just kind of a deck that held back all the slower decks because she could accrue that value, like turn to turn, like build up board state, and a lot of heroes couldn't deal with that, so she would eventually, just kill people. And then she also had very high value plays with like Miragai and Tunic, and then swinging 8 for free. And then I think Aurora, like, she definitely could just gas you down if she drew like the best hand, but she was just very consistent. Like, if you took a card from her, she still kind of did the same thing that she wanted to do. And she's pretty,
I mean, it was very hard to break with Aurora, and that's where you draw a hand that's not playable, because you always had something to go with her. I mean, we mentioned her several times in the cast, right?
Yeah. I think she was like a really good toolbox hero. It's kind of like what I would say, because she had the Runeblade equipment and all the elemental cards. So she got access to like Flicker Wisp for like a longer game plan, right? She would side in that and Arc Lightning, and then you would deal like a bunch of arcane damage that a bunch of heroes couldn't deal with. Or and then she also just had an armor suite that was like a fridge because she had access to the Rune Blade, like Grasp of the Arknight and
Dyadic.
Yeah. Which is like a ton of armor for an aggro deck. So she could really like, full block like a CNC or whatever, like keep a full hand and still send back like 5 cards that would convert very, very well. Just due to how easily she got go again.
So was it Aurora or was it Enigma that was keeping the Guardians down? Because I know, I mentioned Bravo. He seems to be doing pretty good when we're looking at, the charts. Like right now, he seems like he's winning a few games. He won 2 games the first week, 2 games the next week. Victor's on the rise. Jarl, so it seems like they're doing a little bit better now. All right. So who is keeping them back, and why are they on the rise currently?
It was Enigma.
I would assume Enigma. Yeah, because I mean, with Guardians, if you focus specifically on Guardian stuff, I mean, their crush abilities are very devastating, and as with Aurora or those other kinds of heroes where you don't block very well, it's hard to mitigate that crush effect, right? Things that are like your next attack has -4 and you can no longer gain go again. Things like that, I think, have pretty devastating effects. So I would assume once Enigma is gone, which she is, there will be the rise, because even if you're aggro and you poke a lot, they can just do one big crush thing and it becomes very tall, and suddenly, even though you can try to poke a lot, it may not matter anymore.
Zen.
I don't think Zen was keeping many.
Okay, so
current iteration.
Well, damn, I think I misunderstood an overly aggressive.
But that's kind of my thing, and I can add that later, where I just really don't understand meta. Like, I know what it is, but conceptually speaking, I don't understand what keeps what down and what allows what to prosper. And so that's why I always played my Uzuri, and it's just sometimes it feels bad and sometimes it didn't. You know what I mean? Like, but I think,
just like how every deck feels about every deck.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it's more so I just personally don't understand what specific aspect keeps things the way they are, and then it's like, oh, now we need to. Well, anyway, I can talk about that.
No, I think that's a good point, because when I was identifying these heroes shifting out, I know Enigma was having the value, and I knew that she was keeping some of the decks down, but I also thought Zen and Aurora, even though Aurora is still active, she's about combat. But let's say Zen. I thought Zen was also keeping decks down because of his amount of his speed. So that's why I thought the overly aggressive, fast-paced deck where you go really wide in so many formats, I thought that was keeping some of these, like KO. There's no reason to play KO when you had more overly aggressive deck that had better numbers, like Aurora, like Zen.
But I think you're missing the key component of consistency. Right. Things can be aggressive all they want, but if you're not consistent enough, then it's hard to pressure your opponent to, block or not do anything, and then you get to do all the things again. So I think a good example is Syndra, right? Where when she first came out, it was like, oh my God, here comes another aggressive person. But and granted, I don't have much experience playing against or playing with her, but it does feel like she wants to be aggressive, right? She has her pokes, her daggers. She tries to flick. She tries to get the Mask of Momentum proc going. But maybe just because of how people are building her or whatever, she probably doesn't have that same forgo again situation. Or like with Zen, you do what? You Kakar, and then you throw your 1 damage tiger in, and then you get to hit with the chasing tiger, and then you get to search your deck for aspect red to then create another tiger, and then now suddenly the second tiger does another 4 damage, and then that's just like the basic combo that you do, that you can basically do once every 2-3 turns. And that's just consistency, right? And spread out damage and high damage. Whereas I think with KO, when you hit hard, it feels good, or when you get those go agains, it feels good. But you have to definitely have your stars align a lot more than Zen or Aurora, where they have the tools to make a bad hand mediocre or a mediocre hand good.
Yeah.
Is my understanding of why those shine more than, say, KO.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
You're right on the money, I think.
okay. So with them shifting out, and then the Guardians coming out, and then also with this, I do understand that when one person loses their class in a classic constructed, they will naturally gravitate towards something that's kind of similar or use the most expensive cards in another similar deck. So you might see Aurora shift out, and then they'll think, oh, well, maybe Florian, even though he's a completely different play style, and we'll talk about archetypes in a second. But when he's or Acilio, because Acilio does the lightning cards and a lot of her lightning attacks, the talent. But then if you look at the equipment suite, which is the gloves, the hat, face purgatory, and what's the gloves called?
The Dark Knight.
Then those two cards alone is a major reason why you could switch over to Florian as well. All right, so because you have the equipment suite, so that's also when the meta shifts. You want to play classic constructed, you pick your hero based off the cards you have. All right, so I know that's why sometimes the meta shifts, but also maybe even like the aggressive hero goes out, you want to pick another type of aggressive hero. And KO's too inconsistent. So who could I play? Well, Syndra's consistent, even though she has a wide variety of turns, but she also might be expensive. So maybe they play an aggressive warrior like Fang, And even though I wouldn't consider Fang, he is aggressive for a warrior, but he's not an aggro. I don't consider Fang an aggro deck. Maybe that's just me.
I feel like he's supposed to be mid-rangey, right? Like you block and you get your fealties. Once you get your fealties going, then you can now poke for free, which means you can block even more efficiently because of that. Maybe. I don't know. I don't play much. I wish I knew.
Okay. So I know we talked about the Living Legend format and when heroes go toward the Living Legend format and how it can shake up the meta. And although you're saying the growing part here is identifying the meta, and it seems like, Trevor, you have a better handle on what that meta shift looks like when heroes Living Legend. So it seems like there is going to be a meta shakeup, right? And so with all the aftermath, before we talk about like the rest of the Living Legend format and what this actually means, I think this is actually a good podcast to talk about the archetypes of Flesh and Blood, right? Like, because that's where you kind of see the balancing. Like, there's some cards where, there's certain archetypes that keeps others in control, right? And then, so I coined that there's like the big three: aggro, mid-range, and fatigue. And then there's also sub-variants of the big three: control, combo, tempo, disruption, which is kind of fits in. And there's also like some heroes that could be a little bit of both, right? So I think we could take some time to talk about what these archetypes mean. Because if the meta is shifting up and there's a checks and balance systems in place in this game, then we could talk a little bit more in depth about this. Does that sound good to you guys?
Yeah, sure, for sure.
So who wants to tell me a little bit about the aggro or aggressive piece?
I could start with aggro.
Okay.
I guess since I've been playing Dio. But yeah, aggro is just an archetype where pretty much you're just trying to keep your hand in every game because you think that you can just like do it more aggressively. It's probably the deck where you'll go no blocks with the most, because you are just threatening their life total. You really don't care about much else. And your deck is kind of designed in a way so that they all work together for that goal, just like pushing damage. It's pretty rare to be like a setup kind of deck thing, but it's possible. Like Dio's a little weird. You can set an item up, but usually it just wants to go fast. They're usually pretty red line as well, running a lot of red cards.
And so like I think I know Ravenous Rabble and Scarforce Guard in some games, these are really popular cards because I know they really kind of extend the chain, right? So, and like, so do aggro decks have like larger chains, or can they be over the top, like tall attacks coming at you, like a huge attack?
Yeah, I would say like Azalea. I would consider to be an aggro deck a lot of the time, especially on the builds where they're running all reds and like the only 3 blues in the deck are Knock the Dismissal. Pretty much the rest of the deck is like 0 for 3 buffs and arrows, and they just want to like stack a bunch of them, dominate something, and hit you with it with a bunch of disruption and also just damage.
So basically, in this example, we're talking less about going wide per se, and more about just being able to use all your cards to attack in one go. Or sometimes she does go. She does have like go again mechanics, so she can sidestep a little bit and keep at it. But most of the time, most of the times it's just getting out as much value as you can, attacking to the point that your opponent does not, I guess, get a chance to attack back.
Yeah, I guess we went back to like evaluating cards. A lot of these cards get more value on offense than defense.
Right.
So
2 blocks in these kinds of decks, maybe.
High consistent damage, or even wide consistent damage, but you're really trying to push that consistent damage through.
Yeah, and like
I love
pretty poor blocking, I would say.
Yeah. So minimal defense, high damage. Okay. So when I think aggro, that's kind of what I'm thinking about as an archetype too. Fantastic. Now, do you want to cover mid range?
Sure. Mid-range is all about flexibility. You have some defense, you have some offense. Generally speaking, you try to have a game plan where you want to have high-value defense. So you want to have your sink belows, your fate foreseens, your D-react that can block for 4. Or maybe, depending on the deck, you may have, actual block cards that block for 4. And then so because you have these cards that have a higher value for blocking, you want to, in a perfect world, have your hand be half block and half not, right? So you can eke as much value to protect your life total, but then at the same time hit enough that your opponent would either consider blocking and therefore giving up their cards, or taking damage, and there may be some disruption effect in there as well. So it's all about, I guess, flexibility. So that's pretty good. So I think, Azuri is a good example of mid-range. Reinar, I think, is a little bit good too. And then to kind of go into the mid-rangeness of blocking and then having an attack that kind of means something, right? So maybe you do your sink belows, you block a little bit, and then you just throw a CNC. And suddenly it's like, oh, I could have ignored it if it was just, some damage, but now there's an additional effect I have to worry about. Or depending on the situation, you might sneak in, 1 or 2 go again cards to get some tempo back while you block.
So I had a question, and would you consider Ira, Scarlet Revenger, a mid-range or an aggro deck, or does she kind of do a little bit of both?
I would assume she's a mid-range, right? Because her general game plan, as far as I have seen, is based off of 2 cards. You have a blue card that costs 0, so you can swing dagger, and then play a 1 for 5. Generally speaking, so then in that case, you're always having a 2-card 8 as far as value goes, and then you use the rest of the 2-3 cards to block. So. That's my thought. I'm sure you can make an aggressive deck if you wanted to, but...
Yeah, I was about to say, I think there's kind of 2 builds maybe going around. There's ones that run like dual threat, and they try to get value off of that, so they'll try to keep a hand where they go like Kadachi, some 0 for 4, go again. I think they're using Second Strike, if that's the name of the card. I forget, it's from the Hunted. And then
no, Second Strike is...
Oh yeah, that's an Aurora card.
That's an Aurora card.
Yeah, it's the one where like if a dagger or weapon is hit, then it gets go again.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't think of it either.
But they like play that in between, and then they dual threat, and then they go like dagger into another thing, and that's like very high value, very aggressive. So, but they can also, I think, block.
Cut through. That's called cut through.
Cut through. Yeah. Thank you.
And so, would you consider? How about Florian? Trevor, that was your deck, right?
Yeah,
Switch with Dio?
He definitely. I would consider like the Reaping Blade build, mid range for sure, and then he kind of like triggers into this like super high value mid range thing if once your turn online, because you just every blue is 5 damage. That's like pretty hard to deal with for most decks because you block very well with the other 3. And then if they let you keep any, you usually just transform it into like even more damage.
Because Grasp of the Arcanite, that creates 2 rune chants for him. And
You do that to Reaping Blade, and then you just do that every turn. That's mid range. But actually, like an interesting deck that's kind of popped out that is the Florian or the Scepter Florian, which is where he's using that and Channel the Millennium Tree to just stack rune chants, which wasn't really an option before because Enigma would just like trample over you because you wouldn't be able to break all of their shields. And then, but now, since she's gone, like this deck's kind of making a splash.
I think that's called the OTK, 1 turn kill Florian, right? Even though it might take you multiple turns, it just depends on how many root chants you get out.
Yeah, you kill
that 1 big turn.
Yeah. Is that mid range or would that be considered combo?
I guess I could say
it's probably fatigue combo, right? Because you're just waiting it out until you accrue enough.
Okay, then we'll talk about the combo part later. Maybe
OTK might be its own thing.
Okay, all right. So the Reaping Blade build would typically be your mid-range Florian deck. That's where you at the end have the defensive nature of it. Then you start going online. You pitch a blue, make 2 rune chants because of the Grasp of the Arcanite. Swing your Reaping Blade, get that 5 damage. Okay, and I guess I'll pick up the last main variant, and then we'll talk about the sub variants. And this is Fatigue. Don't play this; it's boring. No, I'm just joking. Play what you want. Have fun. But the whole point of this deck is to win by exhausting the opponent's deck. That's either by defense, disruption, discard, or hell, make them even forfeit. No, I'm just joking. Again, I don't have bitter memories about this, but it really is defense oriented. You can also do resource denial, and these type of decks you really have to plan for the long game, right? So it's not really boring. It's just really intricate every turn when you're playing it and playing against it. And I think I'm going to say the comment here, and this might be incorrect, so please feel free to chime in and comment down below if you have your own thoughts on this. New. I consider New generally a fatigue deck. Would you guys, or was that more of a combo? Because there are some sub archetypes that kind of fit underneath these umbrellas, but what would you consider? And
I have not played any in meta news in a long time, but I think back in the day when I played against her, I could have sworn she was more aggressive in nature because it was a lot more do things and then do your attack reactions, typical assassin stuff. But I could see a world where she's a little bit more fatiguey now.
Okay.
I think it's definitely always an option for her to fatigue. Like I think she can kind of play like a little tempo, like mid-range game, but like she does banish with her on hits like from the top of your deck, and if you just like ignore that for long enough, like you just will run out of deck, and then that's when she can kind of like pivot between them. And I'm sure like some news go out there and that's their plan from the start. But
mid-range,
I know, it's interesting because in some of these we're trying to fit like really a complex mechanic, or at least heroes, into an archetype, which sometimes they bleed over to other archetypes too. So for the listeners at home, for the new players, just keep that in mind. We are trying to fit an advanced concept into a simplified term, right? So they might have some aspects in other things, and it does depend on your deck build too, right? I think the one I'm familiar with is the Bravo, and this was when I first started. Bravo was still relevant, and then he kind of fell off when heavy hitters and the other decks came in, and he was able to fatigue very easily by blocking you out, trying to hit you, and you have to use your cards to kind of block to prevent the crush effects. And with the dominate, you're also giving your equipment suite, you're trying to play your D-Rex, so I find like you're on the back foot a lot and overly blocking sometimes, and that'll lead you to just not be able to attack and to just deplete your decks rapidly, right? I mean, is that what you got? And he could be also slanted as a sub-variant, disruption, right? But I do know that sometimes they can play the fatigue game plan, right?
I think a big part about fatiguing is you're using less cards than your opponent, right? At the end of the day. And so a main component of that is then maybe playing a lot more cards that require pitching, but still getting more value. So, we're always talking about 2-card aid or, so on and so forth. But there's a big difference between 2-card aid as in a 4 go again card, or a 2-card aid as in I use one card to pitch for something that is able to get 7 or 8 a value, right? So like Titan's Fist is a great example where you have a 1 card 4 in this instance, but you're not really using that card. You are, deferring that card for later, so your deck size is still the same. Whereas with an Aurora, her 1 card 4 means she actually has to attack with this. So that's 1 card less in her deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, because if they, exactly what you said, because they block with a card here, they lost a card from their deck, right? And then you kept your card in your deck. So if you get to the later game, like you'll have more cards to them. And you just have a weapon, then you swing with that. Utilizing your weapon is like a key aspect of fatigue, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And, Trevor, I always remember the time you came up with the OG Arachne Huntsman and
that's fatigue.
dominated our armory that way. You went 3-0 that day, right? Or 4-0 when we were doing 4 games one night.
Something. I won 1 armory on Arachne.
I heard about this one day.
Yeah.
And you did it by fatiguing a lot of your games, if not all the games, because you went close to time on almost every match, right?
Yeah, we did. There's a time limit now at armories.
Store manager must have hated that day.
Yeah.
Well, it started it, and then when Verdance came out and it was CYB Verdance, then he was like, "No, man,
we had too many Earth mirrors going. That was bad."
But Keenan, we love you, man, but we understand. You want to go home? I get it.
Keenan.
All right. So let's talk about the subvariants. I know we talked to, again, to recap the big 3, aggro, mid-range, fatigue, and you can think of it as a line, right? You got aggro, mid-range in the middle, and fatigue at the end, and then everything else kind of falls under these. And they might have some under both. Like, as it's a wide umbrella, as we talk about the subvariants, they could just kind of fit under multiple aspects of the big 3. All right. Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to cover what one of the next subvariants might be?
Sure, I can go over control. So, I would say these are probably not necessarily coined by the rest of the community, more so things that we just kind of thought made sense. But control, subvariant of control, which is fatigue in nature, right? Where you are trying to get your opponent to fatigue by blocking and denying their resource and then win because that's just what happens. And so I think in our example, Jarl or Nu is very good, right? With Jarl, you're creating these frostbites. So now everything on their turn costs a lot more. They're unable to move. So they might end up using more cards to block and then spend a lot of their cards as resources to be able to do anything on their turn. And then you get to a point where you're getting fatigue as the person playing against Jarl, since now you have to use your cards to block and attack, but you're also moving very slowly, whereas Jarl gets to do whatever he wants. And at some point you just kind of fizzle out like that. Or Nu, where every other card that she owns either banishes a card in your hand or a card from your deck, and she does it a lot more efficiently than Arachne Huntsman does. So that would be a lot more control in nature. Yeah. It's just a lot of disruption and a lot of defense going in there.
And I know control is very similar to disruption because they kind of go hand in hand. So we're just going to kind of group this in the control aspect, right? Kind of keep it simple. Yep. So when you think of control, you can also think about control through disruption or through other things.
Yeah, 100%.
So, all right. Trevor, do you want to cover the next one?
Sure, yeah. Next one we have listed is combo, which I haven't played too many combo decks before, but this is something where you're just setting up a powerful game-ending event using stacking some cards. I think the only time I ever did play one was like old Bolton used to do something where you'd play like 2 or 3 Lumina Ascensions in a turn and kind of go off with that and like mill through your deck and do it's kind of a ridiculous amount of damage. But I kind of don't.
But you gotta wait until you get all the things. And that's the one turn, and otherwise
you can't be holding.
Can't do anything else.
Yeah. It was like I played it super early, like my 3rd week playing the game or something, and I just like IP'd myself for like 3 or 4 turns, just holding Lumina and Arsenal, waiting for the 3rd one out there.
That's funny. That's funny.
And also Max was a combo deck for sure before High Octane got banned, because you would set up that you were basically just like doing a kind of aggro plan, but your real goal is to set the 3 hyperdrivers and draw into your construct the mechanoid. And then once you did that, you could play High Octane, which is now banned. But whenever you would boost, get an action point, and then the construct Nitro Mechanoid is not once per turn; it's just attack. So as long as you can banish something from under it, you get to swing in for 5 or 6, and you do that for like 3 or 4 times a turn, or probably more.
I never realized that this is not once per turn.
Yeah, no, it is not.
Wow.
You just get to enjoy life.
Pretty good.
I played against local Jeremy's Silly, our Drove My Battle Hard winner. And that was a pretty intense combo deck. This is my first time playing against Acilio ever. And so I wasn't sure what to expect. I was just thinking, he throws lightning cards at you sometimes, and then he shoots some arcane stuff. But golly, the turn that I saw him play that combo was silly. So basically,
you would say it was silly.
It was I
saw the cogs turning in your head, bro. You like leaned forward when you thought of that.
Absolutely, it was absolutely Silio.
I was waiting for it.
So you take what your I guess Acilio's deck is like full of lightning cards, right? Or instant cards rather. And then you also equip the lightning greaves, which, if you pitch one resource into it, then every single instant card has go again. And so with, Gone in a Flash, right? So the whole game plan is try to get as many instant cards as you can after you break those boots. And so you just Gone in a Flash, do an instant, and then you bring that Gone in a Flash back, and then you play it again, and then an instant, and you just keep it going for like what felt like ever. And then I just kind of block, and then at some point it fizzles out, and you just say, "Oh, thank the Lord." And then afterwards, even though you no longer do that combo, then he's still throwing arcane damage at you. So then it becomes harder to block even more. So it's very, very interesting. I've never played against a deck that played like that, which like combo go wide. I guess Bolton is sort of similar in that vein, but not really. It's very interesting. Very interesting.
In my first experience with the combo deck was obviously the classic Kano, right? Where they pitch deck, set it up, and then blast you from, you could be at 35 life if you're not careful. They'll crack it and kill you on your own turn. Not anymore, but it was back in the day very much a combo turn.
Yeah, I just remember holding on to my Oasis respites in my hand and Arsenal, IPing myself. So like your opponent knows what you got, right? Like if you're holding your cards in there, and then they're just including that calculation in there as well. And it's just, all sorts of nastiness.
I guess... And I can talk about a little bit about the last subvariant, the tempo. And this is really to maintain the initiative by efficiently trading cards and pushing advantage at each turn. I know this is a theme of Flesh and Blood, but it could also be a deck type where your deck specializes in this. And I know when we were talking about the Takes Two to Tempo podcast, Trevor, you mentioned our local Evan. He plays his Azalea as kind of he thinks of it more of a tempo, even though it could be an aggro. So this is a good example of, a combo kind of deck. And it depends on how you build it. It could be multiple things.
Yeah.
But Dorinthia, Victor, they do, it's a strong value per card ratio. And usually tempo is fairly adaptable. I would consider sometimes even Fang could be considered tempo because he always gets that card, he puts that pressure on, and he's very easy to keep on maintaining that pressure, right? So, is there any other here?
Online.
Oh yeah, which is why his whole game plan is to get online as fast as possible, and then really keep that tempo up, and really controls the pace of the game through that method. Is there any other heroes you guys can think of? that's tempo oriented?
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to Uzuri, right? Because the whole she's like the queen of block with 2 cards, attack with 2 cards, right? And then you ideally see when your opponent kind of trips up, and it's like, oh, okay, something is not going their way. Time to push a little bit more. I think that's in a nutshell, kind of how you would go about it as a tempo character. Yeah.
And then we were talking about a couple top tier decks kind of can blend archetypes. Again, we mentioned Azalea, but you can also build her where she maintains that tempo and has that disruption, or she could be an aggro slanted Azalea deck by going really tall and blasting your opponent's face. I think we mentioned Florian several times where he could be a little bit of combo and aggro once he's online. So I don't really see the aggro build, but the Swarming Gloomville won't. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he could be like combo or tempo, maybe.
Okay.
Because he just kind of something either way.
Yeah. Well.
And I know Jarl. I'm mentioning Jarl because I have the cards to build him. I'm just debating whether I want to do it. Jarl is control and fatigue, which I kind of like the thought of. So, right. There is a concept when we're talking about archetypes about switchboards and how sometimes these archetypes can fit in multiple things. And really, it's a sideboard where you can switch your game plan into a total different deck archetype by using your sideboard. So when you hear the term switchboard through other casters or even at your locals, this is kind of what they're talking about. So some of the game plan can be, do you have a switchboard? You're strong against these heroes, but your weak matchups are these heroes. And so you'll see their main deck is usually 40, 45 cards. And then when they see their opponent, sit down, see the character they're fighting, then they'll do a switchboard and switch into that other deck archetype, depending on what hero they're fighting and what their weakness is. Have you guys ever heard of that term before, or is this something new?
I've never heard of it, but now that you say that, it definitely makes sense. Like a Dorinthia that goes between Dawnblade and Great Decimator Axe, for sure.
Or Olympia.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't heard of a lot of decks utilizing it super well in Flesh and Blood. I feel like usually like the sideboard slots are just that you're kind of like wasting. You have like, because if you like if you were trying to do like a Scepter Florian and like a Reaping Blade Florian and you want them both to have like game, it's going to be like kind of a weaker Reaping Blade Florian and a weaker Scepter Florian because you had to like make space for either one. So you're just, it's kind of better to just like lock in on like one archetype and then like just play them. But it could be interesting. It's never something to like discount.
I think it also depends on who you're playing, right? Because if you're like an assassin character, generally speaking, a lot of your sideboard is taken up by equipment. So it's harder to switch between two different game plans or archetypes, if you will. But if you're somebody like Aurora, or maybe Aurora is not a good example, but somebody where you're always going to use the same 4 equipment or body piece and the same weapon, or maybe switch between one and another weapon, then your sideboard availability is so much more. So then you can actually switch between, do I want to go aggro? Do I want to be more tempo? So
yeah. And this is one that actually just came to mind, and it was a little bit before my time, but I think it was called Tree Farog Dash, where it was Dash the OG, where they would start with Teklo Pounder in play if they were trying to go aggro and just boost people, because that's like a 0 for 6 that just starts on the field. Or if they wanted to fatigue and like go for a pistol plan, they would have like the purifier,
the plasma something.
Yeah, one of those, the one to buff. I think it's a pistol go again. They would start with that and play, and then their deck blocks very well, so they would be able to do that instead and try to like set up some items.
Interesting.
So that was definitely a switchboard that I think was very popular and pretty good. But I never played against it.
Was it IE or IO?
IE.
It was IE. It was
before
IO.
Inventor extraordinaire.
Yeah.
And so I know we had to set up all this talk so we could understand what the LL format kind of means. I mean, I know the main concept of the show, the 50 minutes we've already talked about, the 45 minutes we already talked about this, was covering, what it means when, the meta shifts, when heroes LL, and then the archetypes. So hopefully, we get this. And now let's talk about, we could kind of finish the podcast on this as a format because it's really interesting. You guys mentioned it. Magic has where they cycle out main cards after every so often 3 years, and there's a huge list of cards you can't play. But in Flesh and Blood, it doesn't work that way. If you know, look back at our earlier shows, we talk about how much we appreciate that the cards that we purchased, earned, received, collected, they don't really lose their value because we just switch them from one deck to another, and the heroes and their weapons go, right? And it forces us to play other heroes. That's how you kind of control the meta, but the actual bulk of the cards remains in play for a long time unless a new ban list comes out. But that's very rare, and LSS puts a lot of thought into that. So, what happens when your hero LLs? Well, like, you know, we could finish the show on this topic. Like, what are the options if your hero LLs?
Quit the game.
Let Ning talk about this. I mean, Aurora's walking out the door. What are you gonna do?
God, it still feels so bad. I can't even. I just want to play, man.
Just ban it unless you put Chorus Shem in your deck. Then you.
That's what I'm saying. Like if you put my tree in there, then suddenly it's legal. That's all I want. Or I'll even put in my what were those? What were those cards? Snuff outs. I'll put those in too. Like give me a threshold of aggressive cards I can't have to then meet this. You know, maybe that's another point system we need to work on. But yeah, I don't know the answer to this question. I might look at Syndra. I might just go, play Arachne Slip Through the Cracks or Azuri in the meantime while we're waiting for High Seas to come out and see what happens then. I haven't really put too much thought in there yet. All I know is it feels bad that all these cards, because man, 7 months or 8 months, I guess, is such a short time.
Yeah, I think Aurora was actually it's kind of like a really bad case of the LSS, just because she was a hero that was, I'm gonna say pushed by LSS, but I mean like in the sense like she was for like new players, right? It was the first strike deck, and then you bought the Aurora deck, and then you had like a good deck. Yeah. But it ended up just being like
too good.
Like too good. But I don't think she was like oppressive. She was just strong.
Well, she was easy to pick up and had a high ceiling for people to grow into.
I think the big thing was just because LSS made her so
sexy,
approachable.
Approachable.
I mean, look, she's showing her booty, looking back.
If my wife is listening to this, he doesn't mean it. Right? It's a very clean card. Very clean.
Fully dressed. But they made her so approachable that she may not necessarily be like the best deck in the format per se, but she was definitely the most represented deck in the format. And just by the law of big numbers, which we all know is fake, she would get into the top 8 and therefore win a lot more often just based off of chance.
Law averages, right? Trevor, do you have a point before I mentioned mine?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think she was kind of like the best deck, and there are like a lot of people who just play the best deck, right? Like, people who go around, they'll just pick whatever they think is best. So those people were on Aurora. Then you have all these new players coming in on Aurora. And like, I mean, 7 months is a lot of time to grow. I'm sure some of them took down these PQs and stuff and got those points, right?
Would you say it was a perfect lightning storm?
Sure, man.
All right. Whatever you want.
I don't know. I just think like new players loving her, pros loving her. I think it was just like that's how she got like a ton of these points.
But that's a good point too. Like LSS, like the first one is LSS did a great job, and they had really positive feedback on, doing the strike deck, the first strike deck, right? And then following up with an armory deck, and then really generated the interest with this like flashy hero. Again, no pun intended. I just on a roll tonight, guys. But like all this being said, they did a really great job. But also for those that are worried about their hero L-ing, all right, I know Ning, it's a feel bad for you, man. But we also know LSS emphasizes on the cyclical nature of heroes. Truly. Like, look at Prism. The beautiful angels. Look at the rumors surrounding the Dragon Lady. Dromai, thank you. Like, these heroes are not going to stay gone. They will be reinvented and relaunched with a different subtext to their name. So don't doom and gloom, because I've seen this in Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, where nerfs come or changes happen and people get rid of their army at such a discounted rate. your cards are still good. And LL Living Legend is not a bad format to play at. Now, would Aurora be Queen in that format? Who's to say? But I also know LSS supports the Living Legend format. Just look at the weapons they released in the previous sets. They were designed for heroes that already hit Living Legend, right? So I just think that there's not really a lot of doom and gloom. It is, it feels bad to Ning's point, because I know he put a lot of heart and soul into collecting his cards and blinging out the deck, and I think his Marvel was a group pull, as he was saying. He likes to break boxes with his friends and draft and play, and this was from that set, so it's good times. But I would definitely say don't take your cards and be frustrated with LSS, because they have a plan.
Yeah.
Right, and as popular as this hero was, I would be surprised if next year they didn't have a Aurora variant coming out. I mean, look at Bravo; he has 3 different types, or 2 adult variants, and now he has 3 young variants. I can't remember, 2 young variants, because he's got a new one coming out in the fall, right?
I didn't know it was legal.
It's not legal. It's not legal in Blitz. It will be legal in that format.
Smash Palace or whatever.
Smash Palace, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and they also Prism, the original Prism LL'd within a relative record time, and then they came out with a new one within a year. Like, I don't know how long we're gonna have to wait. I'm sure Aurora will come back at some point.
Yeah, 100% will, but
yeah, especially any card that has like specializations or whatever, right? Then they have to. Otherwise, what was the point of making them specialization cards?
Yeah. And like OG Dash has Dash IO, like they are good about it. I just think Aurora maybe happened pretty fast, so it might not be as quick as we want.
I'm just
in there.
Yeah, and this is question or conversation for another time, I suppose. But I do wonder how new players feel about Aurora LLing so soon, right? Because that was the chief product of bringing new players in, and then now it's like I got into the game with Aurora. Maybe I built it up a bit, and now I'm finding out she's gonna like 2 weeks. What am I supposed to do now? And then maybe it leaves a bad taste in their mouth, or maybe not. I don't know.
It could be.
I'd be curious to know too.
Yeah, I'd be curious if it does have a little bit of small player drop off, but it's also the same thing that when people pick up Blitz decks and then they find out their hero's not even good for the classic constructive format, or that they've already went and gone from Blitz itself, like Chain is a good example there. I still see Chain decks out there. So
yeah, I mean, and to be fair, like again, the Living Legend format does exist, and for skirmishes, which is obviously a little bit more casual, but they also have, I guess, like calling or battle hardened level Living Legend formats, tournaments, and I think the one that happened most recently was dominated by Starvos and Chains. They exist. Now, the question of how stale is that meta, I don't know. If
before our time.
Yeah, way before our time. But the fact that it still exists is very funny for sure.
Yeah, and people are having fun with Starvo and LO.
Yeah,
they love it.
Yeah.
All right,
I love it. So, how can you prepare for the new meta after a hero LLs? I think we already answered that, right? Like, hopes and prayers, as Ting would say earlier.
Yeah, just hopes and prayers. Maybe shift to another hero with a similar game plan, or just play around and feel what's right?
Yeah, talk to your locals and stuff too. See what they are thinking about, streamers. Like ProQuest season's a really good time because like we saw 2 heroes and you can look at the little chart, the pie chart, and you can see like what's popular. When you see an uptick in some hero,
and there's a huge uptick in Florian ever since he won Japan or somewhere, but he's coming up.
I think it was also Enigma leaving. That was a big one.
Well, sure, that too for sure.
But like ever since then, he has been. I mean, he was like 3rd at the Pro Tour as well. So you're not wrong.
Right. Like in week 2, right, of ProQuest, I don't know how many games in total this is. It's a lot, over like maybe 120, just eyeballing it or more. And so Aurora took 47 of those wins, and right after her was Florian with 32. So obviously Florian is coming up.
No, Yeah, so that's something to look out for.
So if Ning was a little bit better paying attention to this format, he would have been able to see a trend of LL points being accumulated. You mentioned 1,000 points earlier, Trevor. Where do you go to find these points totals?
Yeah, so I mean, it's on the official Fab website, right? So you can go there and they have the Living Legend leaderboard, and they'll actually show you like how many points each hero has gotten in a season. Like, so we're in the hunted season right now, so how many points each hero has got since then. But yeah, that's probably your best resource for how you can figure out when your hero is going to LL, is to use that. And then really like being on like your other ones are like the Discord and talking with locals. I mean, it's everyone's been talking about it for like weeks. Everyone knew as soon as ProQuest started, Enigma and Zen were gone because like they were decent enough decks and they were like close enough to the finish line.
And darning, I'm sorry you're working so much, man.
Yeah,
it feels so bad. I feel like I've missed so many ProQuests.
I mean, there's still a lot more.
There's still a lot more, but I still can't make it, you know. And then whatchamacallit, I actually checked so I'm going to Asia in 2 weeks, and so after that, is the ProQuest over? When does the ProQuest go until? I don't recall.
Like middle of May. Yeah,
middle of May. Level Up one is like one of the last ones. I think that's the
17th. And coincidentally, that technically would have been the only one I would have been able to make, except I have to travel for away from Level Up. Oh. So it's just everything feels bad.
Sorry, Ning. So I guess we could like start going ahead and move into the myths concept. There's not really like a whole much to talk about dealing with the meta shift and archetypes. But we could say let's cover this one. Is there any reason to play your hero if you missed the hero's prime? Like, let's say someone just now picks up the Aurora Armory deck. Is there any reason not to play the hero?
It would kind of just be for fun, or it would be for LL, right? So it kind of just depends what you're looking for. I mean, you could definitely play her in like Blitz or something like that. Could be fine. But if you're trying to play like competitively in this game, which a lot of people are, the biggest events are CC, and there may not be. I mean, you could still play her. Well, not in CC, but you could still play her in LL and try to have fun with that at the events that people do. But she might be getting a little bit out competed there, if we're being honest.
Okay. Right, or just play with your buddies. And
I mean, there's nothing wrong if you like Aurora and you just want to play with your friends. Like, you're open to Armory decks, and just play them against each other. Could be a good time.
And again, like if you look at some of the decks, even though they come and go, the equipment suite is still really good, if not the best equipment suite for Aurora at that time. But for any other Lightning hero, might use it down the road. So even if you have your cards again, no worries. LL is a great format if you're going to these larger gaming conventions or tournaments, because you could always simply play the LL format if you're not playing the main event and get prize tickets to go on the prize wall, which is a great thing to get promo cards, which you can either trade or sell at your local for higher value or on the Purple Discord. So there's a lot of different ways. So if you really, really love a hero, you could find a way to play it in LL, or as Trevor was saying, in Blitz, depending on the hero. Check the official Fab website.
Yeah, I think the other, I think you mentioned very briefly, is with every new set comes new cards. And I'm sure it's also fun just to use new cards with old heroes and see where that takes you.
So, all right, and then go ahead, Trevor.
Do you have any interest in Acilio, Ning? I was just wondering. I was thinking just because you have like lightning stuff, or is that
just in general?
Yeah.
I have tinkered with the thought of it before, but like I haven't put too much stock into that thought yet. I mean, I think, after playing against Jeremy when he was playing Acilio, I did think, oh, this is pretty neato. And so I may give it a try or so, but I don't think. But to be fair, the only reason why I was so gung-ho about Aurora in the first place was because my buddy opened the Aurora Marvel at World Year. And
Okay.
yeah, so it was more sentimental than like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I really like her play style.
Okay.
But all that is to say, it did seem interesting enough. But it's also it's also kind of interesting because Acilio is a very different game plan than Aurora, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Where it's kind of it's like we said, it's very combo-y, and what comes with combo is just blocking a lot until you get to do your thing. Which I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't. But for the most part, I haven't put too much thought into that.
There is benefits for Acilio. Like some people haven't really still figured out the Acilio deck's archetype or playstyle or the cards to fit in the perfect 60, however you want to call it. So there is room to cook with that deck and kind of make it your own.
For sure.
So, and that's the good thing about such a complex character like Acilio, because, you know, man, I mean, I look at the cards, I didn't even know how to kill a person with that deck when I first saw it. So,
yeah, and you do know that he is definitely playable because A, he picks up wins in the Pro Quest, and B, I'm fairly certain he's made top 8 in major tournaments.
Every so just did it on a battle hardened.
Yeah, so it's definitely playable, definitely. And there's also the thought that, you know, not many people have played against Acilio, so that can be
a big one. Yeah,
that can be an advantage on it if you ever want to, you know, try to sneak a win in there.
All right. Well, do you guys have anything else to add about this topic before I start wrapping it up?
No, I think I'm good.
I just wish people will let me play my tree girl. That's all.
He's not talking about Verdance. He's still talking about Aurora. Yeah. Just to let you know, he's talking about Corfisham, the Crossroads car landscape. So, all right.
You know, just one more thing. I ended up getting a play mat of Corfisham, and it's like it won't even see the light of day.
Oh no.
Oh man. All right. So, you know, meta shakeups, you know, they're fun. They bring deck building freedom, and there have been several historic meta shakeups, right? Again, it really creates a unique and thrilling playground. And honestly, sometimes the ability to cook new things in a kitchen. Shame. He just crapped out. That's okay. He's gone in quick like lightning. All right. Anyways.
Like Aurora, bro.
Like Aurora. That's good. I'm going to keep that one in. All right, so for Meta to Legend and the shift pile it leaves behind, we covered a lot of different things. So remember, every turn is a decision, every decision is a story, and don't forget your damn Tunic Counter.